Hey, speaking of air and water, like Bud Spence always used to tell us, we're growing orchids, not mushrooms. You need to have the proper amount of light and the proper amount of water, but not too much.
Hello folks, welcome back to the St. Pete Orchid Farm. I am here with Micheal here, and we are going to discuss the frequently asked questions regarding orchids.
Hi, welcome to the farm. First off, I'd like to discuss some different types of orchids and their particular needs. So we have like some dendrobiums, some phales, epis, cats, oncidiums, behind me here some vandas, and some reticulates. Light care. You want to know what you have, like a phale, low light, versus something that Cattleya like, higher light. Don't get confused with all the different genuses. Here's 15 pages of intergeneric orchids. Stick with the basics. What you know, what you have, a dendrobium, a phale, higher light things like cats and vandas.
Okay, and then what about watering the orchids?
Watering, the biggest mistake usually is overwatering. Some stuff like to be a little bit more wet, some a little bit dry, but you should always check, do you need to water? You don't want the plant to dry out, but you do want the medium to dry out in between watering.
So what kind of fertilizer should we use with orchids?
Orchids themselves are not particularly fertilizer hungry plants, but they do like it. Everyone likes to eat. Whatever you're using, make sure you use something orchid specific, whether it's time release capsules or liquid. Seaweed's a good one. Just don't overuse it. Whatever it says on the bottle, use half to a quarter of what it says.
Okay, so use less than what it says.
The more frequently you're fertilizing, the less strong you want it to be.
Okay. You'll find it. So what kind of pests and disease do you encounter with orchids?
Particularly for outdoor growing, it can be a problem. As far as pests, you have snails, thrips, those kind of things usually are dependent on it being too wet or not enough airflow. You always want to keep the plants far apart so there's nice airflow for them. If it's too wet, you can experience scale and rot inside the roots. That's again why not walk over water and get some airflow. If you do need to treat for pests, basic rubbing alcohol works really good on some topical disease insect killers. Hydrogen peroxide also works on fungus. The best thing is just look at them every day and check and spot spray so you don't have to broadcast spray a bunch of chemicals. We don't like chemicals.
No chemicals. So definitely, if you have orchids, check on them every day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Micheal, let's take a look at repotting orchids and when and how that is done, okay?
Eventually, your orchid is going to outgrow its pot. They go across. It becomes a little unmanageable. Your old mix breaks down. You need to redo it. That can happen every year or two. We use a mix of bark, about 2 parts bark, 1 part perlite, and 1 part expanded ceramics. You can throw a little charcoal in there to make it sweet. With some of your more low light, need a little bit more water plants, you can add a little sphagnum, a little. This holds so much moisture, it goes back to the overwatering part. You don't really need that in most of them.
Let's take a look at the repotting process.
Okay, eventually your orchid is going to outgrow its pot, or the mix is going to break down, so you're going to have to repot it. It's always a little messy. We like to use, when we're using our tools, clippers, you might use a screwdriver. In the case of a basket, you might need to saw through it or saw through the plant. But you always want to sterilize whatever you're using so we don't spread viruses between the orchids. So this is the messy part. I'm gonna pop it out, knock all that old mix off, clean it up a little bit. Now I could take this one on its old growth back here, and you can see the new growth here and here, and put it in a pot, one pot, old growth against the edge because it's growing that direction. Or this is big enough that we can divide, and this is how we end up with a lot more orchids. So you want to keep about 4 to 5 pseudobulbs together, and then we're going to go right in here, and it's a little horrible, but cut that into 2 separate pieces. Separate the roots. See, that came apart pretty easy. You can find where it's going to divide at. That's some new growth on this one, new growth on this one. Set that aside for a second. I'm going to take the mix I showed you earlier that we used, put it right here in the pot. Like I said, old growth against the back, and just backfill it, not burying the pseudobulbs, because you can bury the roots, and put it in that pot. You want to keep it super still. If necessary, you can make a little pot clip, a little bend, a bend, and a bend, and that will help you to clip the plant into the pot to stay still. Or your other option with pretty much any orchid, you can mount it on wood. You want to get, again, just like in the pot, the old growth up against there so that it's going to grow up on the piece of wood. I like to use zip ties. If you have smooth wood, you want to get it as tight a piece of wood as possible. If you need to fill it in a little bit, you can use a little sphagnum in there to get it tight, or some sphagnum on the outside, and you can't possibly overwater this.
And here's our special guest, Micheal. You can introduce her.
This would be Gladys. Say hi, Gladys.
Hey.
Hi.
Lovely.